Hi there and welcome. Thanks for joining me here. Tonight we'll take a slow and quiet walk through some curious stories from history. We're drifting gently into the odd, quiet corners of history, where inventors dreamed big but the world simply moved on. This is your invitation to let go, lean back, and wander through a sleepy timeline of inventions that, well, didn't change the world. Some were strange, some were charming, all were mostly unnecessary. But that's what makes them perfect for this moment. Nothing to remember, nothing to solve, just small, curious stories to keep your mind company as you float toward sleep. Let's begin in the 19th century, a time of steam, corsets, and truly questionable ideas. 1817, the mechanical leech. In the early 19th century, bloodletting was still thought to cure just about anything under the sun, from headaches to fevers. For centuries, physicians used a practice called venesection, or deliberate bloodletting, because they believed in balancing the body's humors. Medicinal leeches, actual squiggly aquatic worms, were among the most popular tools for this job in Europe at the time, so much so that millions were imported and used annually in hospitals and clinics. But leeches themselves were temperamental and not always easy to manage. So, in 1817, French physician Jean-Baptiste Sarlandière invented what some called a mechanical leech. Instead of relying on a live animal, his device was essentially a mechanical blood pump, a brass instrument designed to mimic the action of a leech by creating suction and drawing blood in a controlled way. It was sometimes called a bdelometer, named after the family of blood-sucking creatures it was meant to imitate. At first glance, it would have looked quite stylish, with polished metal and elegant curves. The idea was that it could replace living leeches and offer doctors a more predictable way to treat patients by removing blood. But despite its ingenuity, the mechanical leech never really took off. It didn't improve health outcomes, and it didn't win mainstream popularity. The traditional leech, with its peculiar charm and naturally occurring anticoagulant, remained the machine's unlikely rival for a time. So, while the mechanical leech may have been clever, it ultimately joined the long list of inventions that worked in theory but never quite changed the world. A curious footnote in the history of medicine, and perhaps an amusing reminder that not all clever ideas find a place in everyday life. 1829, the anti-bandit briefcase. In the early 19th century, travel was not as safe or predictable as it often feels today. Roads could be lonely, inns could be rickety, and pickpockets and bandits were a real concern for merchants, officials, and anyone carrying valuables. In 1829, someone, historical records don't clearly name the inventor, came up with a rather theatrical solution, the anti-bandit briefcase. The idea was straightforward in concept, perhaps too straightforward. If someone tried to steal your briefcase, you didn't just drop it, you emptied it. Or at least, that's how the mechanism was meant to work. The case was engineered with a hidden spring-loaded release. If a would-be thief finally got their hands on the latch, the contents of the case, papers, ledgers, coins, would pop out suddenly, tumbling into a startled mess on the ground. The theory was that the thief would, at the very least, be surprised, maybe embarrassed, maybe even discouraged from further pursuit. In practice, though, its effectiveness was questionable. For one thing, spilling a pile of leather-bound documents onto a muddy road did little to deter someone who was already inclined toward theft. For another, many honest travelers found themselves startled, frustrated, or simply annoyed every time the case opened when they didn't want it to. It turned out that ordinary, everyday bumps and shakes were often enough to trigger its mechanism. The anti-bandit briefcase never became standard travel gear. It mostly remained an oddity, talked about with a slight smile by historians and collectors, but rarely seen outside of a cabinet of curiosities. Yet, for a moment in time, it stood as a testament to the kind of ingenuity that sometimes springs from genuine worry, and the kind of invention that proves more amusing in hindsight than effective in practice. 1851, the revolving hammock. In the mid-19th century, when people were experimenting with steam engines, cranks, and pulleys in every corner of life, someone thought, what if swinging could be automated? This idea gave life to the revolving hammock, a contraption meant to rock you gently without your having to push or pull. Imagine a cozy hammock, the kind you might dream about on a lazy afternoon. Now imagine it not just hung from two trees, but mounted on a clever frame with a hand crank or wheel. Turn the crank and the whole hammock would swing in a circular motion, as if someone unseen were giving it a long, slow push. The intention was simple: to provide effortless comfort, a constant cradle for rest. Perhaps it was meant for homes, porches, or even nurseries, a place where someone could relax without lifting a finger, lulled into that slow rhythm of forward and back. But here's where things didn't quite go as planned. Many people found that continuously revolving in a hammock, even gently, was not as soothing as it sounded. After a few minutes, a surprising number reported a sensation we now know too well: motion sickness. Heads turned green, stomachs fluttered, and the dreamy idea of perpetual rocking became a little less dreamy in practice. The revolving hammock never caught on as a mainstream comfort device. It lingered briefly in catalogs and curiosities, then quietly faded into history. A lovely concept that perhaps worked best in theory, rather than in everyday life. And so it joins our timeline of inventions that were delightful to imagine but ultimately more amusing than life-changing. 1910, the isolator helmet. In the early 20th century, innovation and invention were everywhere. Trains were carrying people faster than ever, electricity was lighting up entire cities, and people were imagining new solutions to old problems, sometimes in unexpected ways. One such idea was the isolator helmet. At the time, inventors were exploring ways to help people focus, rest, or tune out the chaos of daily life. The isolator helmet was essentially a personal sensory bubble, a large padded hood or helmet designed to block out almost all external stimulation. Picture a smooth domed helmet made of thick cushioned material with only a small opening for air. The intention was peaceful. People believed that if you could remove sound, light, and distraction, you could concentrate better, think more clearly, or even rest more deeply. The isolator helmet was sort of like an early sensory deprivation tool, created long before flotation tanks or meditation chambers were common. But here's where it got peculiar. Wrapped in its cushioned cocoon, the wearer looked less like a focused thinker and more like someone preparing for a deep space voyage. Walking through a room with that helmet on was not so much escaping the world as becoming a very unusual part of it. Silent, still, and visually striking. And so the isolator helmet remained a curiosity, a moment in history when someone tried to solve the problem of overwhelm with something that looked more like science fiction than everyday gear. In the context of our gentle timeline, it stands as a reminder that not all inventions are meant to be adopted by millions. Some are simply ideas that leave us wondering what the world looked like through their inventor's eyes. 1923, the motorized ice cream cone. Ice cream has always been one of life's simple delights, cold, sweet, and soothing on a warm day. But in 1923, someone asked a question most of us never think to ask. What if your ice cream cone could turn itself? So was born the motorized ice cream cone, a small handheld device built with a tiny mechanism that would rotate the scoop for you so you wouldn't have to move your tongue as much. Imagine holding a cone and pressing a little button. The ice cream begins to gently spin, slowly turning so that every side gets equal attention. No effort, no twisting your head, no uneven melty drips, or so the idea promised. On paper, or patent paper, it sounded delightful, a bit of automation for the tiniest of tasks, a touch of convenience for the sweetest treat. In reality, well, it brought a few complications. For one thing, ice cream melts quickly. A motorized cone meant extra parts, little gears, and, inevitably, sticky situations. Ice cream could drip into the mechanics, gum up the works, or drop unexpectedly on the lap of someone sitting nearby. What was meant to make enjoyment effortless sometimes made it messier. And though there were patents and a handful of prototypes, the motorized cone never became a staple of summer treats. People still licked their scoops the old-fashioned way, turning the cone with their hands or taking bites without mechanical assistance. Still, the idea lives on in little stories and obscure patent archives, an amused footnote in the history of invention. It reminds us that sometimes a brilliant idea can be perfectly unnecessary, and that's okay. Because not every invention needs to change the world. Some simply add a moment of whimsy to the vast tapestry of what humans have imagined. 1936, the baby cage. In the early 20th century, urban living was changing quickly. Cities were growing taller, apartments were becoming smaller, and families began to rethink what it meant to live healthy and well in close quarters. In 1936, a curious idea emerged that today might seem unusual. It was called the baby cage. The concept was simple: give babies fresh air and sunshine, even if the family lived on the 5th floor of a building. But instead of taking the baby downstairs or outdoors, inventors suggested something a bit different. They designed a mesh-wired cage that could be attached to the outside of a window. A baby would lie safely inside, protected by breathable mesh, while sunlight and fresh air streamed in. The baby was still technically indoors, but exposed to the open elements in a way that was believed to be healthy. At the time, fresh air was considered almost medicinal. Doctors and health advocates encouraged people to air out their homes and let children breathe the breeze. The baby cage was simply a creative extension of that idea. Why not bring the outside in, even from the 5th floor? Photographs from the era show small babies contentedly resting in these cages, suspended just outside apartment windows, with soft blankets to keep them warm. To a modern eye, the sight might look odd, even slightly daring, but at the time it seemed practical and wholesome. Of course, what matters most now is care and safety, and many parents today would prefer a shaded porch or a stroller walk to a window-mounted cage. Yet, in its own way, the baby cage reflects the boundless human instinct to seek comfort and well-being, even if the method seems peculiar in hindsight. It's a gentle reminder that not all inventions are shaped by skill alone. They're shaped by the hopes, beliefs, and understandings of their time, and sometimes what people once trusted with a calm heart can feel curious or even whimsical to us now. 1955, the self-lighting cigarette. In the 1950s, people were still getting used to lots of modern conveniences: electric razors, automatic coffee makers, and refrigerators in every home. Smoking was as ordinary as a morning cup of coffee, and inventors were always looking for ways to make daily tasks just a bit easier. One idea that came along in 1955 was the self-lighting cigarette. The thought was simple. What if lighting up didn't require matches, a lighter, or flicking a wheel? What if the cigarette could ignite itself as soon as you took it out of the pack? On paper, it sounded clever. You wouldn't have to fumble with a matchstick in the dark or share a lighter or worry about wind blowing your flame out. The cigarette would take care of its own flame, just like a self-starter on a car. What could go wrong? Well, everything. Some versions of the self-lighting cigarette were designed with a small chemical compound in the tip that would react and ignite spontaneously. Unfortunately, this meant they could ignite accidentally, in your pocket, in a drawer, or at the bottom of a purse. And of course, that was not the kind of surprise most people wanted. A few prototypes caught fire at unexpected times, prompting startled yelps and singed fabric rather than convenient comfort. After a few too many pocket sparks and frantic fanning, the idea quietly faded away. The product was quietly removed. The humble match and the simple lighter remained the preferred companions of smokers everywhere. In our timeline of inventions that didn't quite change the world, the self-lighting cigarette stands as a reminder that convenience is only worthwhile if it actually works. This tiny spark of ingenuity burned bright, but just a little too soon. 1961, the pedal-powered toothbrush. In the early 1960s, inventors were fascinated with ideas that promised to save time and combine tasks. People were just beginning to embrace products that helped make life easier. And so came an idea that at first glance seemed both efficient and imaginative: the pedal-powered toothbrush. Instead of moving your hand back and forth to brush your teeth, this device invited you to sit and pedal, much like a stationary bicycle, while the toothbrush, connected by a system of gears and belts, took over the scrubbing for you. Imagine sitting on a small stool, legs pedaling gently, while a mechanical arm above your head brought the toothbrush down with rhythmic consistency. In theory, it was the perfect solution for anyone who ever complained about the effort of brushing their teeth. But here's where things got a little bit awkward. For starters, the coordination didn't always work the way you'd hope. People found themselves pedaling too fast or too slow while the toothbrush either missed spots or scrubbed a little too aggressively. Some inventors tried adding speed governors, others experimented with multiple brushes, and still others added mirrors to help visualize the process. But the core problem stayed the same. Teeth aren't best cared for from a distance. Perhaps the most memorable feedback from those trials was that users often ended up with leg cramps and toothpaste splatters. Instead of feeling refreshed after brushing, some folks simply felt tired and slightly sticky. The pedal-powered toothbrush never became a staple in bathrooms. What most people really wanted, and still want, is a toothbrush that fits comfortably in the hand and does its job quietly and simply. And so the classic manual brush, and later the electric version, continued its reign. Still, the pedal toothbrush remains a curious example of human creativity, a creative attempt to automate the mundane and a gentle reminder that not all clever ideas stick. 1972, the TV hat. By the early 1970s, television had become a central part of everyday life. Families gathered around screens after dinner, news flashed across the nation, and every living room seemed to have its own little box of glowing images. Some inventors wondered, what if the TV experience could be made even more personal? And from that question came something rather unusual, the TV hat. Imagine a baseball cap, but instead of a simple visor, it cradled tiny screens right in front of each eye. Wires trailed behind it, antennas stuck up like curious rabbit ears, and suddenly, you weren't just watching the TV, you were the TV. The intention was clear, a fully immersive portable viewing experience. Instead of sitting in a chair and looking at a screen across the room, you could walk, lie down, or even do chores while absorbing your favorite shows. In theory, it was futuristic, almost like something out of a science fiction novel. In practice, well, let's just say that it didn't quite revolutionize home entertainment. For one thing, the screens were tiny, and the images weren't particularly crisp. The weight of the hardware made the hat bulky and uncomfortable over time. And most people found it hard to wear, especially for long periods, without feeling a little silly or disoriented. Friends and family might have walked past someone wearing the TV hat with bemused looks, as though they'd wandered off set into their own one-person broadcast. So like many inventions born of optimism and technical curiosity, the TV hat became a charming story from the archives, a device that almost took us into the future, but ended up being a delightful footnote instead. And in our quiet timeline, it stands as a gentle reminder that even the most futuristic ideas sometimes return us to simple comfort, like watching a show from the sofa instead of wearing it on your head. 1999, the nap desk. By the end of the 20th century, the world was already deep into the age of multitasking. Computers sat on every desk, cell phones buzzed in every pocket, and sleep, for many people, felt like a luxury rather than a necessity. Enter an invention that was perfectly suited for that very dilemma, the nap desk. Imagine arriving at work in the morning, yawning after an early commute. You sit down, open your laptop, and just slide back into a cozy nap position without ever leaving your desk. That was the idea. The nap desk was essentially a large desk surface mounted on a hinge or swivel. With a simple adjustment, the work surface tilted backward, forming a kind of flat, cradle-like platform for resting your head and shoulders. Add a pillow, and suddenly your office transforms into a mini nap pod. In theory, it was brilliant, work plus rest in one. No time wasted walking to a break room, no need to schedule naps, just transition seamlessly from spreadsheet to siesta. In practice, though, people found a few unexpected complications. For one thing, the ergonomic support wasn't quite up to par. Office chairs aren't designed for lying back into an almost bed position, and the nap desk, however innovative, didn't change that. Cushions and pillows often slid off. Heads bobbed awkwardly. Some users reported waking up with cricks in their neck that lasted longer than their naps. And then there was the social aspect. Coworkers staring curiously, managers unsure whether a brief rest was productive or simply a nap. Even if a company officially embraced nap culture, many employees felt self-conscious using their nap desk in an open office. So while the nap desk showed up in a handful of design magazines and sparked some yawns of interest, it never became a staple of corporate life. People still got up to stretch, found couches in break rooms, or just took a walk outside to recharge. In our sleepy timeline of inventions that didn't quite change the world, the nap desk remains a gentle symbol of an idea that was kind, even if it wasn't quite practical. 2002, the USB pet rock. In 2002, we were well into the age of personal computers. USB ports were everywhere, on desktops, laptops, and even some cars. People were connecting all sorts of devices, cameras, flash drives, keyboards, mice, and apparently pet rocks. Yes, the USB pet rock. At first glance, it sounds like a joke, and in many ways it was exactly that, a playful little product that embraced the sillier side of tech culture. A pet rock itself was not a new idea. Rocks with names and personalities had been given as gag gifts decades earlier. But someone thought, what if it had a USB plug? So they made one, a smooth stone with a built-in USB connector that fit neatly into your computer's port. And then nothing happened. You plugged it into your computer and, well, it did nothing. No lights, no beeps, no data transfer, just a rock hanging out of your computer like a very quiet, very low-maintenance digital friend. In a world where gadgets often demanded attention, updates, batteries, and passwords, the USB pet rock was remarkably peaceful. It did one thing and one thing only, remind you of how absurdly we sometimes chase innovation. Oddly enough, it caught on in a niche way. People bought them as gifts, tokens of humor, conversation starters. And perhaps that's exactly why it has endured in memory, not because it did something useful, but because it meant something lighthearted. A tiny wink at tech culture, wrapped in stone and USB metal. In our timeline of inventions that changed nothing, the USB pet rock stands out not as a failure, but as a gentle reminder. Sometimes novelty is its own reward. 2013, the ostrich pillow. In a world where people were always on the go and always plugged in, some began to wonder, what if we could nap anywhere? Not just in bed, not just on the couch, but anywhere at any time, on trains, in waiting rooms, at airports, even at your desk. And so, in 2013, the ostrich pillow was born, a curious, squishy invention that looked much like, well, an ostrich's head. Picture a big, padded pillow designed to cover your entire head with soft fabric, enclosing you in a gentle cocoon of cushioned comfort. There were holes for your hands and sometimes for your nose, and a thick, plush exterior that invited you to just rest. At first glance, it was impossible not to smile. People wearing ostrich pillows looked wonderfully ridiculous, like cartoon characters mid-yawn or cozy creatures just emerged from hibernation. But there was something else beneath the whimsy, too, a deeply human desire for rest. A longing to take a moment, even amidst noise or waiting, to close your eyes and just breathe. In practice, the ostrich pillow did help some people do exactly that. In quiet spaces, with a soft seat and a few minutes to spare, it could transform an ordinary chair into a little island of calm. Travelers tucked into it while waiting for flights. Students rested their heads on it between lectures. And for a fleeting moment, it looked like maybe it would be the next great nap innovation. But the world soon discovered that not all naps are created equal. The pillow was bulky and warm, perhaps too warm for extended use. It wasn't very portable, and in many public places, it simply drew curious glances. And while it felt like a hug for your head, it wasn't always convenient in everyday life. So the ostrich pillow didn't become a staple of travel or office culture, but it did become a beloved oddity, a gentle and goofy reminder that sometimes comfort is worth chasing, even if just for a little while. In our sleepy timeline of inventions that changed nothing, the ostrich pillow doesn't fail. It soothes. It shows us that even the most unusual ideas can bring a bit of joy, a bit of rest, and a bit of laughter along the way. And so we come to the end of our sleepy timeline. A gentle trail of dreams that didn't quite take off. Ideas born of boredom, or hope, or just the strange urge to make life a little easier, a little sillier. Not every invention has to change the world. Some are just stories. And stories, even odd ones, make lovely pillows for the mind. Let your thoughts settle now. You're safe, you're warm, and your brain doesn't need to invent anything tonight. Just rest. Good night.